Just curious, by the way, I know you worked in New York, worked for George at Aldea, and you worked per
Yeah.
se Bouchon, but you're not from New York, right? I think you're
No,
from
I'm
are
from
you from the
North
South
Carolina
or
originally. I'm from North
nice. What
Carolina.
what part?
Greensboro, so the Piedmont. So I did my undergrad at Chapel Hill, and I went to boarding school up actually in Asheville. So, but my parents moved to North Carolina, so like I'm the first generation. So not really no real Southern accent. My mom is from Chicago, my dad's from Connecticut, and he was a professor of ancient history, and so he got a teaching position at one of the universities. So specifically, University of UNCG Greensboro. And so then he moved there and my mom as well. And then I was born there. So yeah, so then
Wow,
to
that's
New
awesome.
York
Are
for
you are
culinary.
you a history buff as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love stories, right? And so history, whether it's I mean, there's a story in anything, and I think that that's kind of like I love storytelling. I What got me into cooking was actually wanting to be a food writer, and I had been living in France, and I had one more year of college to finish back in the United States. So I'd come back, and I was thinking, okay, if I want to write about food, I should get a job in a kitchen so that I know what that's like, because I think that that's just a thing we should do, right? If you're going to write about food, you should at least have worked in a professional kitchen at some point. And then so for the summer before I was going to start school again, I started working in actually two kitchens. So I was like working, I don't even know how long those days were, for like 20 plus hours. I was working and I loved it. I was so happy and I totally fell in love with kitchens. And so then that's why after finishing my undergraduate degree, I decided to move up to New York to go to a culinary school there, because I didn't want to go to the CIA after having done, many, I took 5 years to graduate because I'd gone to France for over a year. And so it was like I wanted to do something that could grow some skill sets for me, but not have to be, you know, another 3 years or 2 years at CIA.
Yeah, and you ended up going to ICC, right?
I went to, at that point, it was the French Culinary Institute, then it
Oh, it
changed
swept
to
the
the
FCI everything.
International
Yep.
Culinary Institute. But yeah, I did. It was great.
Yeah,
I did their savory program and their bread program.
nice.
Yeah. So,
Um, so random, but I
yeah.
heard a rumor that you love your calendar and like making sure that everything's on your calendar. Is that true?
Yes. Yes, I do. I mean, I think that it's there's a lot going on. And I mean, even still, I find it like a lot to juggle. And I think it's if I have a calendar, one of the things I feel like is like today's version of Avery makes better decisions for her future than to the like if I have to make decisions today on my day, I don't always make the best decisions. But if I made the decisions a day ahead or a week ahead and follow those decisions, I do really well. Do you know what I mean? Like in the moment,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
more impulsive, whereas if I'm a little bit removed from it, so I like a calendar because it's like, what am I supposed to do? Oh, okay, I made a plan, so I'll just follow my plan. That's all you have to do in theory.
A
Obviously, things come up, but
100%. I'm
yeah.
I'm also like a fanatic for
Hmm.
calendars, and it's funny because I love just jamming through a prep list.
Yes,
Like just like okay, I got an event tomorrow. Like here's
yes,
everything I have to do. I'm gonna time out. I know that it's gonna
yes.
take me about an hour to make this sauce, and I got to prep this stuff, and
Hmm.
like I then I can just I spend a lot of time
You
up
just
front,
do
and then just follow. You know.
absolutely, and I'm
Eh,
definitely an overthinker, and it can get a little paralyzing. And so when I make the lists, like then it's like, okay, I've set this time aside. I've thought through these things. So then
yeah.
you can just act. You don't have to, you don't get bogged down, because sometimes you get bogged
Yeah.
down during the list making, but it's like all of your actual work and thinking has happened during that time. Then the actual job itself, whatever it might be, is not, you can kind of just enjoy it, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting is to-do lists are pretty irrelevant if they aren't um if they aren't relative to the amount of time you have to do the to-do list.
Hmm.
So you could have a checklist of all the things I got to do today, but
Yeah.
if that list takes you 14 hours and you have
Yes.
13 hours,
I
then
know.
it's just not getting done.
No,
So
for
that's why I
sure.
love putting everything in my calendar.
Yeah.
Even if it's not granular, like just even if it just says like, okay, task block 2 hours,
Yeah.
strategy 2 hours.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I love, and anytime I meet anybody that uses their counter that way, I get really
Yeah,
excited
no,
because
I
yeah,
definitely feel the same way. And it really, gosh, again, like I think the biggest thing for me is just like how do you balance? Because as big as we are in some ways, we are also very small, my like the company. And so I wear, like any business owner, a lot of different hats, and I'm excited about those hats that I wear, but sometimes then it's like, okay, if I don't have this to-do list, like today, for example, before this morning, I went to my Campbell store, and I one of the things I've learned to do is be much more realistic with how much time I need to allot things. Like I'm definitely trying to do less variety of things with each day and have more like a day be a specific kind of area of the company that's really working for me. And so, I went to Campbell, and I'm, of course, tomorrow there's a whole bunch of things I want to worry about that are maybe more involved with like the production side. But, if I don't have, I'm very good at like being like, this is the blinders on, right? And then everything else is
yes,
waiting. That was
yeah,
not something I could do at first. And that's been a big help to get to that place, because otherwise you just feel like you'll be working really hard and getting nothing done because you're too scattered,
totally,
right? Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
You know, I call out. By the way, I call it this app that I use to a lot of people, and now
Yeah.
I'm actually having the founders of the company that built this app.
Oh,
It's a
cool. What
calendar
is
app.
the app?
It's called Reclaim.
Oh,
They're coming to the podcast, but I love it, and
cool.
it's like an AI based calendar that helps you to time block things, and it'll
Yeah.
automatically move things around. Um,
That's great. I'll look that up. I've
yeah,
seen
definitely.
ads for some of the AI calendar things. Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried a bunch. This one tends to work the best. You know, the other thing, I don't actually do this, but I've heard people that do this, is if you're, I mean, you're probably like, look, if we have businesses, we own businesses, we
Yeah.
worry all the time. I'm sure you're like, at least I know I do worry all the time. And, there's always anxiety. What's going to happen? I've heard of people that actually schedule time to worry
Oh,
so
really?
that yeah, so that they know, okay, I'm not gonna worry about this now because I know that tomorrow at 2 p.m. to
Oh, that's
2:30
so
is like my
funny.
worry time.
Yeah. That's really funny. I have not done that, but I definitely I I think once you get enough time with a low level of, like, my anxiety levels have changed dramatically, because now it's like you expect the hit, like it's gonna happen. It'll be okay. You'll get through it. Things happen. So I'm a much less of I feel like I don't have as much anxiety worrying, which is good, which is good. I'll take it, And
Hey,
that's one of the things I
good
am
good for
having to
you.
maybe outsource worrying to some other people.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So
Cool. So, by the way, I think there's something like a phone or a
yeah,
computer that
you
keeps.
know, it's like I don't know what's happening. So let's see what happens now.
I think it's a charger that's
It
like
was. So
going
it took.
disconnecting.
I disconnected, but I don't know what was bumping it. But anyway, it's
All right,
disconnected.
it's
It
all good.
won't happen
All
anymore.
good. And by the way, this stuff can get edited out. I just,
Oh yeah, but no.
um,
But I heard it too, and at first I thought it was anyway. But we're disconnected.
cool. So I want to talk about Manresa Bread today, but I
Yeah.
think to start, we're going to get a little bit in the weeds of
Okay.
just baking, if that's cool.
Sure.
So first question for you, and I don't usually do it this way, by the way. I don't usually like just like drill in with some questions, but
No
I
worries.
want to learn some stuff, and I think other people get a lot of like value out of just hearing some of these like
I'm
things.
happy to
So
talk about bread always. So, or baking
so
in
can
general.
you talk about, pontificate about, expound on the benefits of milling your own flour versus
Sure.
buying, um,
Sure.
and to sort a couple sort of ancillary things there are
Uh-huh.
like, because you all mill a lot of your own flour,
Yes.
except bread flour. So I want to know why you didn't mill
Sure.
bread flour.
Okay.
So why don't we start there, and then I have some other stuff.
Sure. Um. So if we back up to the beginning of the bakery, I had been baking. I loved baking. We were going to open. I was baking at Manresa. I was making the bread for Manresa. Bread or from Manresa. I was selling the bread at farmers market, and everything was great. Okay, so we're going to be opening a bakery. We're already at that point where I'm in my career where like we've got investors, the bakery's funded. We're going to open a bakery. And I took this trip back to New York to visit some baker friends and to visit some bakeries. And then I went down to North Carolina, and I went and did a stage at a bakery up in the mountains outside of Asheville. And so when I went to New York, I visited, all of the bakeries that were around at the time, and had a lot of really tasty bread. And then I went to this bakery in or outside of Asheville, and I had the bread at this bakery, and it was after, so I'd had this concentrated week of eating bread. And I go to this bakery called Farm and Sparrow, and it was like, what is this? What is this bread? And it was, he was milling his own flour. And it was this, I could just taste the difference. And it was incredible. And it was like, what? Why does this taste so different? What is this? This is like, this bread doesn't even look like, it's like, you don't know what's going on. So it was the real takeaway from all of these like amazing bakeries. The one bread that was memorable was from fresh milled flour. So that really got me like curious about fresh milled flour. And I'm a curious person. So I like to, I love ingredients. I like the stories of ingredients. I think, obviously that's a passion. I live in California. So it's like we have some of the best, growing climate, et cetera, in the United States. And so when it was just thinking about what we wanted to do for the business, it was like, well, I want everything to be the best it can be. And so it became very clear to me that milling our own flour was important in that process. And so I ended up going up to the bread lab as well, which is at Washington State, and visiting what is called the bread lab, which is like it now is in a slightly different location, but it used to be part of an adjunct facility campus of their the ag school. And so got to talk to farmers and like academic farmers about like grain and the nutritional values and what's in the flour, like what we're learning more about flour. So a wheat berry has multiple parts. It has the endosperm, and then it has the bran and the germ. And so when we mill flour fresh, if we're milling whole grain flour, which is what we currently do, we're taking the entire piece of berry and we're utilizing the whole thing. And the biggest thing that happens, so there are flavor components in flour, like they're kind of a little bit heady in the sense, like you're not going to taste, I don't think it's like, this is a raspberry.
Yeah, I
and this
gotcha.
is a banana. Yeah. Like those are two very different flavors, but wheat berries and different varieties, we do have different flavors, and they definitely have different colors and they have different aromas. And so milling your own grain flour, or milling your own flour, starts with just like what kind of, so you have choices. So I think that was part of I was curious about too. What choices can I make as a baker? What can I manipulate? How can I express myself, both creativity in a creative way, or my creativity and my curiosity, and also make the most tasty thing. And I think the biggest thing to understand as kind of a non-professional baker about using fresh milled flour or purchased flour, and at this point, we're not even talking about whether it's sifted or whole grain, but just fresh versus fresh milled, you were milling yourself, or bought off the shelf at the grocery store already milled, is the freshness itself. And the freshness of freshly milled flour allows it to absorb a dramatically different quantity of hydration. And this is really what's fundamental to in the bread making process. There's a different mentality to think about if you're talking about making pastries, but when you're thinking about making bread, it's that it's the hydration level that it not only will support, but really requires when you use fresh milled flour. So the exact same recipe utilizing purchased organic whole grain already milled flour will absorb a dramatically smaller amount of water.
Yeah.
Okay. So because of that, when you think about what is fermentation, and specifically sourdough fermentation is the process in which yeast, is eating the sugar that's in the flour, and then it is multiplying. And in order for yeast to live, it needs access to food and water, just like any other kind of like
Yeah.
living kind of organism. Right? So it is using, so the higher hydration is supporting a higher level of activity and fermentation. And then the fermentation is not only breaking down the gluten, but the lactic acids and the acetic acids that are produced by the fermentation process of the yeast is breaking down as well the protein structure, and it is processing the flour itself, so that when we eat a piece of bread that was made with a fresh milled sourdough loaf versus a um off the shelf but same exact recipe sourdough loaf, it's
Yeah.
going to be a lower quantity of hydration and it's going to be a lower level of fermentation. So, and then that fermentation, what we experience then as the person eating this slice of bread, is a better mouthfeel, a better texture. It's also gonna last longer because it's got more hydration in it, like even after
Mm-hmm.
baking. Um, Better like activity. So like the crumb itself, and obviously there's different recipes and different things people are looking for in a crumb. Sometimes you want a more open crumb, sometimes you don't. But the texture itself, like what it literally feels like to like chew that piece of bread, because of that high hydration and because of that fermentation, is just gonna be an all around better slice, right?
Yeah.
And then additionally, it's going to be better for your digestion because so much of this wheat itself was
Ah.
um processed, if you will, pre-processed by the sourdough fermentation. So the work your body has to do to digest it is much less, which is why some people who feel like they are, obviously celiac disease is a thing, but some people who feel like they are wheat adverse or sensitive
Mm-hmm.
to wheat find that when they eat truly properly fermented breads, especially if they're made with fresh milled flour, they actually are fine. I mean, and that's a little bit like anecdotal depending on the person, but we definitely find that with customers. We have a lot of customers who say, I can eat your bread. I don't eat bread
Yeah.
pretty anywhere else, but I do eat your bread, you know.
That's
And
so
that, and it's so
interesting.
that
Yeah.
all of those things together. So that's why we mill our own flour, because we truly taste a difference between, and it's the same grains of it. So if let's say I don't want to make, for some reason, I decide to buy a bag of milled flour, I'm using the exact same variety of grain, like hard red wheat grown in California, organically grown. And I'm using the same exact recipe. It is a very different loaf of bread, like our 100% whole grain loaf of bread that we make. Very different. Completely can taste the difference, even though it was made with exactly the same wheat berry, because of the freshness of the flour.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it
And
makes so much sense.
yeah,
There's like the obvious, I just sort of associate it with my dumb savory chef brain of like,
yeah,
well, fresh ground spices are better than,
yeah.
spices that were ground a long time ago. But there's all these downstream effects that I didn't
The
realize.
downstream effects are so dramatic, and the flavor, in terms of like the freshness, the flavor is definitely there, but again, it's a little bit more like you taste the whole thing, and the whole thing is because of the hydration of the fermentation that was allowed because of this fresh milled flour. So it's like you can't even access those flavors unless you're doing all of these, because obviously most of us aren't sitting around eating, you know, handfuls or
Yeah.
spoonfuls of raw
Yeah.
flour, but yeah,
What
so
about the consistency? Meaning not the in terms of texture, but maintaining
consistency.
the like what hydration you're supposed to use. Are there difficulties of like, is it dynamic in that each time you
It's a
have to sort of
little bit
test?
dynamic. It's more dynamic in the beginning process of making a bread. So like in the creation of a new product, that's the most dynamic element. I mean, that's a big thing we factor into our recipe development because we have pretty good um continuity with our teams. Like if people leave, they're typically leaving because of a move somewhere, that we very infrequently, knock on wood, have people leaving because they're like, I don't like working here. It's pretty much almost always something dramatic, like I'm moving, my boyfriend and I are moving, or so but we keep these things in mind because we want to make the best thing, but we want to do it, to some scale for sure. At this point with 5 stores, and we'd like to continue to grow the business. And so the dynamic has more to do with the training process. So correctly training people to utilize the mill,
Is
maintaining
it
the
is it
mill.
more about the mill, or like if
It's more
if you're
about the
buying
mill.
this wheat berry and you like
It's
you
more
do
about
you
the
know
mill.
every
It's
time
it,
it's 72% hydration,
ninety
or
percent. Yeah. So the consistency from the vendor itself of like, hey, this is a hard red wheat berry. We find much less inconsistency with the grain side. What you find more inconsistent with, occasional inconsistency, it doesn't happen very frequently, is with purchased flour. Because purchased flour, when you're talking, you were asking about bread flour, for example, purchased flour, it's what we would say it's sifted flour. It's so they've taken the bran and the germ out of the flour. So you're just having the endosperm. And then what the grain companies do is blend, typically, like what we work with, uh sorry, KGBS, but the flour that we get, it is sifted and then it is combined. So like it is not necessarily one kind of flour. They've taken maybe different batches of flour and combined them to hit the protein content that you're looking for. So the protein content in American flour is, we just communicate one thing. We communicate just a protein content. So, and you go anywhere from your cake flour, which is the lowest protein content, up to like a bread flour, or even almost like a reinforced bread flour. In Europe, they also give you a number that's about elasticity of the dough too, which is really interesting, but we don't, extensibility kind of factor of the dough, but that's not how it's communicated in the United States. So what we purchase is a sifted flour. And the reason we purchased that is because we didn't have a sifter. And so now we actually have a sifter, and we're in the process of kind of defining how we want to be including that in our process. We're not at a place where we would be sifting 100% of our flour, but for example, like, I mean, definitely for the pastry department, we'll be utilizing that. So like we'll, putting on a banana cake that is 100% made with sifted flour that's sifted in-house. Because, some pastries are great with whole grain flour. Some pastries, not everybody, and I'm more of like, I see flour as an ingredient, coming from like a chef background as well. Like I'm not like a diehard, like everything has to be whole grain or
yeah,
everything has to be fresh milled. It's about like, where is this going to impact the overall product and be a better product. And so we currently purchase sifted bread flour because and then all of our breads are either, they go anywhere from being 100% whole grain or combination, but we don't really make any bread that doesn't have any sifted flour in it or fresh milled flour, except for like an enriched dough, like a brioche, or our brioche currently
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
have. But
gotcha.
otherwise, everything else has some variety or some quantity of sifted flour or fresh milled flour up to 100%. And
Uh-huh.
so we see it as more like, what are you trying to get? And then again, we use bread flour because it's an ingredient. And like, if you're going to use a fresh milled flour, but you want the loaf to have some kind of higher like size because you want to use it for a sandwich, so you want something that has a little bit more structure to it, then incorporating some percentage of bread flour to help create just a little bit structure and so that's how we really look at it, is like, what are we trying to accomplish, and then what are the right components to get there.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I think Keith Justo is the flour company you were talking about, right?
There's Justo's. Keith's Justo Bakery Supply is the distributor, and then for whatever reason I'm blanking, because now Justo's is a bread company as well. And I can't believe I'm forgetting this.
That's
KJBS.
okay. We can find
It
it
doesn't.
later,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
you can Google it. But what's your thoughts on? I mean, it's so funny how flour, and I love this, that, you can go so deep on flour. And I mean, look,
Yeah,
I love Sir Galahad all-purpose flour. I mean,
people
it's a
do.
great
Yeah,
flour. But
yeah.
when I hear you talking about this, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what is your thoughts on just all-purpose flour in general as
Sure,
a
sure. And I'm just
product to
gonna
use?
add in it's Central Milling that I was like
Central
losing my
Milling.
mind.
Cool.
Central Milling is the company. All-purpose flour I think is great. I mean, again, I think that home bakers working with having an AP flour is great. You know, what I think is though interesting, and one of the things if I am teaching people or talking to people about baking and they're maybe like they've been trying to make something at home and they're like either, why is your version of this seem like it comes out so much better, or I'm not happy with this, or I want to tweak this. What I think people don't really understand, I think most of us don't understand if you're just baking at home and never have had any like real background in bread or baking in general, is that so, no, baking isn't magic, right? Whether it's pastry side or bread side, it's science, and it might seem magical, but it's really about the properties of the ingredients you're utilizing. And so I think with AP, well, I'm totally pro AP flour. I think it's something that like it would be so helpful for people to know sometimes, like maybe the reason you're not happy with something is because of the product you're using. And so I think that that's where there's, just if you think about like the branding, all purpose flour, well, it is and it isn't, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so, you want something to be a little bit more delicate, like a biscuit, but you want it to be really tender. Maybe you should be using a portion of AP flour, but also a portion of cake flour, like,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think that that's something just like where I think it's a little bit, yeah, it's a little bit deceiving, I guess, in the sense that like you cannot necessarily achieve what you're looking for with AP flour, and changing the flour or even a portion of the flour could have a dramatic result for
Yeah.
your final
Yeah.
for the thing you're making,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Whatever happened to white lily flour? I
It's
used to
still out
love
there,
making
man.
biscuits with
We
them.
still buy it. My parents buy it. Yeah, they
It
get
is
it.
so good for biscuits, like
It
drop
is so good. That's exactly right. We have it at our house in North Carolina. My parents love to cook, and so yep, we get white lily flour. Yeah,
I don't see it
it's so
anywhere in the
tender.
stores, but
Yeah,
it is.
I've
Yeah.
never seen it. I've never seen it on the West Coast. I've never seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay. We're gonna get out of the weeds a little bit
Okay,
here with the flour. And I am going to read a quote that I read from you that
okay,
really resonated with me, and then we'll talk a little about what it means for you. So you said
sure.
it's great to be the least knowledgeable person in the room. This means you're in a room full of people who are experts. Every day in the kitchen is an opportunity to learn something new if you surround yourself with the right people.
Hmm.
This is like something I like live so much of my life by. Is
Yeah.
I always want to be the dumbest person in in the group of folks that are around, because I will leave that place knowing everything that they know plus what I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it's such a great mentality. I'm curious for you, and I think about it for myself as well. Like, you now have a business that's growing, it's grown a bunch. You've been baking for a very long time. Like, how do you continue to grow and learn as and surround yourself with more people that know things that you don't, as you're scaling your business and just generally as you're growing as a person?
I think that, I think that that mentality is something I just take with me. And so, in a sense that it leads the choices I make, right? So, like, in some ways, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You will create opportunities for yourself to continue to learn if you love to learn. And so, that's just like innately built into the choices we make. So, like, I think about it a lot actually, because it's like, some people, well, it's definitely about attitude. You have to have the right attitude, as in you have to have an attitude of curiosity, and you have to go into the day thinking, what are you going to learn today? Because I got some really good advice when I first started cooking. And I was like, when I was at Aldea, there was actually a really great group of like line cooks there who had much more experience than me. And one of them was a slightly older guy who's, I think he was from Thailand, and he had like traveled all over the world working. And he said, every day you write down what you learned. Write down a couple, like it's kind of like almost like a gratitude journal, right? Like, and so and he was like, you write down what you learned, and you write down what you either like, maybe it's a mistake you made or a thing you want to do better the next day. And I would, take the subway back and forth because I lived in Harlem and I worked down, Aldea was, gosh, like, off Union Square. And so, I was on the subway a lot. And it was like, so I just, on top of having my little like little notebook with all my recipes in it, I would jot down. This was kind of a little bit like before we had such massive cell phones. I feel like where you now take notes in the cell phone, but I would
Yeah.
jot down. I would do that, and it was like it was such a way to be present in what you were doing, and like and going into work with the right attitude, because like at that point I was going to school every day. School was a little bit like not, it wasn't a waste of time, but it was like I was already cooking, and you had kids in this classes who had never cooked, who were like, I think I want to be a chef, or and then you had people who were a little bit more like me, and so that was I looked at school before I was doing the bread program, but especially in the savory program, as a place to like practice and create opportunities. Or, but it was more about the creating opportunities. Like the reason I wanted to go to that culinary school was because of I looked at the chefs that had come out of there and had successful businesses. So like David Chang went there. Um, the original guy who founded Cezanne, Christina Tosi, like all of these people who had successful businesses had gone through there. So it was like, okay, I see this, like, I see people being successful. And then they were connected with so many great chefs. And so it was an opportunity to like meet so many chefs, et cetera. So now that I own my own business, we decided to be a business that was going to grow. So, I could have had a bakery where we make everything and we sell it in the same location, and that's a done deal. And then that's kind of like you're in a little world. Well, no, we wanted to have a commissary where we make everything. Okay, so you're constantly having to solve problems. You're constantly, and if you're growing, you're having to both solve new problems. You have to like, so it's just innate in every day. And
Yeah.
I'm lucky
Yeah.
enough to have a business that's been successful. So same thing. We've kind of put the challenges in front of ourselves. Like we went through a multi-million-dollar expansion in the last couple of years, between three new stores in 2023, and then three new stores in 2022, and then moving into our new commissary in 2023. So we literally are celebrating like our 1 year in this new commissary. And so it's just always about like, what have I learned? How can I do this better? I tell my team that I'm not attached to anything except for the quality of what we do and like the safety and kind of like contentedness of our employees. As long as people are safe and kind to one another, and as long as what we're making is delicious, the way we do it, I don't care. If you think it would make more sense for us for a reason, for whatever reason you might have, to mix our levain bread in the evenings instead of in the mornings, let's talk about it. The not being too attached to anything except for having guidelines that you live by. So we have to like perform those two things. So I'm not going to make a change if it's going to make everybody miserable, but I am going to work towards a change even if people aren't totally on board with it yet, because I think it might make something better. So like we're going through that with our pastry team right now. We have some pieces of equipment that when we moved into our new facility, the equipment that I purchased for this facility, we moved all of our old equipment and then we repurchased new things. Some of that is really simple things like additional ovens, but some of it is the idea was to make the job easier for the employee physically so that they had more energy to focus on the creative and the quality side of what we were doing. So we have it's called a cutting table. So when you make a croissant, you use your sheeting table to lock in or the dough with the butter, right? And then you sheet it out. And then so now you have a long roll of croissant dough, and now you have to cut it. And you have to cut it into the shapes for the croissant or the pain au chocolat or whatever it has, maybe. So we now have a machine where you take the dough off the sheeter, and you take it over to this other machine, and it basically runs down the top of the machine, and there's a wheel. It's very simple mechanics. There's a wheel, two different wheels, and they cut the croissant. Because when I looked at the croissant process, cutting croissants, there is some skill to it. You need to cut it correctly. You need to cut it the right shape. But it's not a particularly interesting job cutting croissants, right? It's
Yeah.
not
It's
very
definitely
interesting.
a rote job, but it has to be accurate.
It
Otherwise, you
has to be
get bigger
accurate.
ones.
Accuracy is the issue. But otherwise, whereas the shaping of the croissant, how you roll it up, all of that's much
Mm-hmm.
more impactful. And so it was like, well, if we can use this machine to cut them, now the employees, number one, it's much more efficient. Number two, they're freed up to have more time to create more. So it's just, I just see places to learn always. Sometimes the hard part is more like I can see, and that's where I'm working on growing as a manager, continuing to grow as a manager, I think, and having the right people around you who are okay, who give you that feedback, right? Like it's up here for me. What to do, what's going to happen next, how to make it happen, but I can't physically do it. Like the bakery's way too big for me to physically do everything myself now. So learning how to communicate my plan or learning how to communicate like the scope of a concept or an idea, and then working with my managers and my team members to implement a plan or for them to fill in the details. That's definitely something I'm getting much better at. But like that took a lot of time, both for me to get better and for me to have enough of a structured team around me that both knew the
Yeah.
company,
Yeah.
knew what my ethos were, knew where we were trying to go. And now that's exciting because I'm not the only knowledge holder. I can be like the idea person and then I can come with the idea and say, like, for example, we're going to be putting a tomato soup and a grilled cheese on the menu soon, right? And so, like, that's something we wanted to do as a team. We wanted, but then how you actually start that process or implement the process in the stores, in the cafes, that's something that I want my store managers to be a part of, right? Like, okay, like, how are you going to use the equipment in the store to heat up the grilled cheese? How many, just like, because there's a lot of moving parts. It is not, things can be much more complicated than you could ever imagine. Like you would think a grilled cheese and a tomato soup, easy, but it's not
Oh,
actually
yeah.
when
Yeah, for
the right
sure. Yeah, especially at
packaging.
scale with that
You
many
just
locations.
exactly like there's
I'm
just
sure.
so many questions you have to answer. And so we're getting so much better with our systems
Yeah.
about doing that. But yeah, there's no lack of places to learn.
Yeah. It's fun
So,
though. I think that's
oh, I love
one of
it.
the best parts of it is
That's why I love being a business owner because you get to use all the parts of your brain and you get to make changes and the biggest thing is like, and then you learn if you want to get better, like that's your responsibility. So it's like, it's on, excuse me, it's on me to be better, not just on my team members to be better. It's on me to figure out if we're not getting the results I want, and we have really nice, great people working for us. So it's not just this, like, why aren't you doing this? It's like, okay, we need to go back to the drawing board. What are we not understanding? What's not being communicated? And so much gets lost in communication. So it's, that's something we work really hard on. And I agree.
Yeah.
It's very fun.
Yeah, and I think as you scale too, I think the thing that I struggle with a similar thing of,
Hmm.
there's a concept in my head that I want my team to implement and making sure they understand fully what, like,
Yeah.
we oftentimes
Oh, I know.
overestimate what we think people
Yes.
grasp about the idea that we have.
Yes. Yes.
But the fun thing as you start to scale a business, which you're clearly now doing, is the more you involve everyone downstream, actually the more effective it's going to be. I
A
remember
thousand percent. A thousand
last
percent.
season, Ron Parker, really, really smart operator. He used to run Union Square Hospitality Group. Now
Oh,
he's
yeah.
the CEO of Jose Andres Group. He said, a lot of what he did was development, like like building out new restaurants, right? So like
Yeah.
designing everything from the design to the space, such as, and something that he said that stuck with me was how much he involves the staff in the
Oh, yeah.
design of new restaurants. Because to your point,
Absolutely.
yeah, a grilled cheese and tomato seems very simple, but
Absolutely.
where are you going to store all that bread? Where's the cheese
Bread
going to live?
storage.
Like, it's
Huge problem.
sliced,
Yeah.
like once it comes out of the toaster, the convection or whatever it
Yeah.
is, where's that going to land? If you have 10 of
Definitely.
them, how do
Yeah.
you land 10 of them at the same time?
No,
Where are you going to wrap it
totally.
up? If it's
To-
it adds up,
Totally.
but the biggest mistake I think that folks make, that it sounds like you're not making, which is amazing, is just assuming that you'll figure that out and then hand it to the team, as opposed to getting them involved, because then they
No.
also have ownership. And
No. And again, like retention of a team members is so important, right? Because it takes time. It takes time to learn each other's language. It takes time to get to know somebody's strengths and weaknesses too. So, and I'm very lucky. My parents really wanted like, um, that my parents are incredible parents. And so they were extremely supportive and really believed in like raising well-rounded children. So it was really important that we spoke multiple languages and all of those things. So like I speak Spanish fluently. If I didn't speak Spanish fluently, I have no idea how I do my job, because it makes a complete difference in what kind of leader I can be for my company, because I have a ton of Spanish speaking team
Yeah.
members between the retail stores and the production facility. And so I can go into a store like this morning. I went to my Campbell store, and it was our first cafe. And we opened that cafe in 2018. And so it had multiple years of operation before the pandemic. And then with the pandemic, everything shifted. When we first opened, we didn't have DoorDash. It was not a component of our business whatsoever. Obviously, during the pandemic, we launched it, and then we've maintained it. And it's quite a big part of our cafe model now, just because of this popularity. And so, like, while the store was very thoughtfully designed, it's had to pivot its use in certain areas. So, like, we've been going through a big process of kind of like, again, hearing from the employees. Like, we used to have a portion of the line that was in the front of the store, and then the rest in the back. And when pivot happened, or excuse me, when the pandemic happened, the front of the house became where they were like what staging all of their to-go orders, right? And so like the
Mm-hmm.
feedback from the employees was like, no, we'd prefer to have all of the kitchen things happening in the kitchen. Okay, well, how do we move this equipment, and what can we get, how do we, so even this morning we're over there doing that, and I'm getting feedback from the employees, and we're doing it in English and we're doing it in Spanish. And it's like,
Yeah.
if I couldn't do that, you'd be like, it'd be like trying to do your job, shape bread with one hand, which I'm sure people can do, but it's not necessarily the most efficient thing to do, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I definitely, and I don't know, and it's so nice not to know everything. I'm so happy not to have to know everything, because for a long time, I felt like I had to know everything because we were a young company. I knew I didn't know everything, but I didn't have anybody else to be like, okay, how are we going to problem solve this? Like, we didn't have a very experienced team. I knew nothing about retail. I'd never worked in retail in my life. Neither had my business partner, Andrew, and he and I kind of run the day to day, or, especially at the beginning, he and I were running the day to day. And so, uh, it was hard, but now it's like I can talk to somebody. I can say like, hey, Randy, who's my store manager in Los Gatos, like, what are your thoughts on like how the line is working? Like, what do and they have an educated opinion and experience, and then we
Yeah.
can build
Yeah.
off of that together. So it's great. I
Yeah.
love that.
I'm curious. This is I don't know if you think about this, but clearly it's been successful, right? You launched
Mhm.
it. Now there's a bunch of locations. The bread is obviously fucking delicious. But what else is contributing to the success? Because it's got to be more than the bread, right? Because there's a lot of
Yeah,
delicious
I
bread.
think
But what do you think is making this concept work so well?
um I mean, obviously it's a lot of hard work. I think we have very clear standards of what we're trying to do. I think there's a lot of determination. These are such, I guess, but they sound kind of cliche, but what I mean by that is, I mean, there are highs and lows in any company, right? Like, you have to know that, like, we've had bad hires. We've had team members who've like taken us in, where you realize, oh gosh, like, because you don't know who somebody is till you know, right? So we've had people who were like, gosh, this person seems like they're going to do so great. And then you start to hear that,
Yeah.
no, not so much. And
Yeah.
then you got to kind of rebuild a culture when you get that person gone, because, the employees around that person are a little gun shy, et cetera. So I think that, I think, I think it's about being curious. I think it's about being willing to evolve. I think, you got to have confidence in yourself that you can solve problems, and believe in yourself that you're going to get through tough stuff. But you also have to have not too much of an ego to say, look, if I'm getting feedback that this thing that I thought was great, people aren't enjoying, I got to hear that feedback, like
Yeah.
whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
So not having
And
to
from
your
a
ego
brand
to,
perspective,
from
like,
a
I think
brand,
those
yeah,
are things that like you how you operate, but
but from a brand
from
perspective,
how
I
customers are resonating with
Yeah, well, I
with this
think it
brand.
has to do with, I mean, in a bakery, quality and consistency, in any brand, quality and consistency have to be at the forefront of what you're doing. And I mean that on a product side, but I also mean that on a customer service side. So our training process, is something we're always improving and spending a lot of time on. So how we how we tell our brand story, um, how people experience the store, like our spaces. All of those things I think are not taking things for granted as a brand, I think is really important because that's something we really talk a lot with our staff because we have a strong brand and we have a strong uh, customer following. And so one thing we really push with our retail side is that you can't rest on your laurels just because people come in. So like we can even see sometimes the salesmanship and the experience that I observe sometimes in some of our busiest stores can sometimes not be as high as it is in some of our smaller stores. And we talk to our staff about that because the staff in the busier store sort of expects, like, I don't want to say they expect the sale, but people come in, they know what they want, and they leave, right? So the person doesn't have to work that hard sometimes to do their job. And so we really are like, talk to them about like, what does it mean to be impactful employee? Like you always, what are our points of service? When do you greet a customer? So I think, that's doing that stuff
Yeah.
day in and day out. I mean, we all read, Setting the Table, the Danny Meyer book, and it's about coming back every day and doing the same job. And if you can't do that, if you don't have the attitude to do that with your brand, I think brands get lost, right? I think people get lost because something becomes successful and you forget why. And then if the employees change
I
or
love that.
whatever. Yeah.
I love that. Are there, so you have 6 locations now? Is that,
I have 5 stores and then our commissary is like,
and
so
your
we have
commissary?
6,
Got it.
6 buildings, if you will.
So like, what are you still not delegating today that you're like, pretty sure, like I need to get this off my plate soon?
Mm, it's hard. That's hard because I I see my job. I feel like I really talked to my team, my management team about, are you doing a job that only you can do? If you're doing a job, you're doing a job someone else can do. Obviously, you need to pitch in and jump in here and there. But if you look at the breakdown of your work week and you spent the majority of your job doing the same job that, like, if you're a store manager and how you spent your week, the entire week was just ringing customers up, then we need to talk about like your choices. And so what I mean by that is when you ask me like what I delegate, I don't think that there's a thing. I really try to spend my time doing things. And a lot of my day is like with other managers, right? Whether it's a chef or whether it's a baker or whether it's a cook or it's working with them. That's really my job or how I see my job because I can plan where I want the company to go. And that part, like, I'm not going to delegate that to somebody, myself and, Andrew and David, like we talk about where we want the company to be, but that we're not going to get there without me helping the team move in that direction. So I think in this last year, this facility has really helped me feel like I'm in the right, like using my time correctly, right? And because as a business owner, as a woman to some degree too, I think for a long time there was like a lot of like guilt, like if I'm doing this thing, I should be doing this other thing too. But you can't do 2 things simultaneously, and you can't really multitask. Like you're just gonna do 2 things not that great. So I'm not saying I have it all figured out. I'm just saying in terms of delegation, I try not to do jobs that somebody could do better than me. So like, I don't want to do I want to have a input about the graphic design, but I don't want to do the graphic design because somebody else is going to be better at that and faster at it. Right. So, but I want to be a part of the process. So I really try not to do things like I'm going to go with my pastry team next week and I'm going to work with the pastry team all week next week because they're not using some of the equipment the way that I think there's efficiencies we're not finding.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to put more products on the menu and we're hoping to grow our wholesale. So, and I don't want to hire many more employees. So I don't expect them to solve that problem by themselves.
Yeah.
That's my job. And I like problem solving.
You're such an operator. It's so funny. Hearing your dog is just It's very
I mean,
clear,
that
like
wasn't always the
which
case at all. That wasn't always the
yeah,
case.
but I
But
mean the very maniacal might be the wrong word, but like the very detailed approach to, because it's
yes,
true. Look, there's
because
no
that's how you get
like
somewhere. If you don't have
yeah,
a
there's no like
plan,
one thing that makes it work.
exactly.
You have to just
And I've
get
had
all
to
these things to
figure
hum.
I've had to figure a lot of like I definitely have gone too far in the other direction and too far. I've done it all. You know what I mean? So like you're talking to me at a specific moment, but I've been the person who was 1000% killing myself and not having enough maturity business wise to understand I was the owner and I could hire more people if that's what, like, not trusting my decisions, right? And so and I was the one who suffered for that. And then the opposite direction of hiring people and maybe giving them a little too much sort of like hands off for and then being like, well, this isn't what I
Yeah. Yeah,
wanted. Like,
look, it's so hard,
yeah,
right? You don't know, like, how much am I
it's the
supposed
things
to dig
that
in?
you
How
have
much
to
do I
do,
give
right?
up? And
As the
yeah.
entrepreneur and as the operator, same thing. Like, if you're not getting the result you want, you can't
Yeah.
blame other people. Like, if
Yeah,
you're in
but
the business, you can't.
it's such an advantage when you are an operator like that, because
Yeah. Well, I love
especially in your
operations. I love
business.
operations, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why
Yeah.
I wanted to be a business owner because I love baking, but same thing. I wasn't going to go, I don't, for my personality type, which it takes all kinds of personalities, right? I don't want to work for somebody else. I want to learn from other people. I want to be inspired by other people. I want, I don't need to know all things, It's like my business partner was a hedge fund analyst. Like, thank God, and that's why I wanted him to be my business partner because it was like I want look around the room. Who has more money, Avery or Andrew? Andrew has more money. Okay, Andrew, how about you be a part of the business
Yeah.
because you know about money?
Is is David involved at all?
He is, but he's for so long Manresa obviously Manresa just closed now 2 years ago, so he's not a part of our day-to-day operations. He's more a part of like kind of like long-term planning, and then and he always has been more hands-off, which is great. Like that was a sign of confidence for us with like I was the baker and Andrew was the at the beginning the business person, but like in terms of he wrote our business plan. He and I learned a lot from him. And that's why I wanted both him and David as my business partners, because it was like, I want business partners, I can learn from. Like David's obviously an absolutely incredible world-class chef, but also has like created a brand in and of himself and Manresa and in like just like having a career in food. So like there's just endless things to learn from there. And I mean, that's what brought me to Manresa in the first place, was to work for David, because when I met him in New York, it was kind of like meeting, it was kind of like when I tried that bread and it was like, this bread is different, right? It was like, David, this person's different. He was fun and curious and thoughtful, but also very focused, but also like having a good time. And it was like, this is different, And I really wanted to work in a restaurant at that time that had its own farm. So I wanted to work at a high level, like as in like a multi-Michelin star restaurant. And I wanted to work with somebody who was extremely focused on where their produce was coming from, because it's the same mentality that I've gone to at the bakery. Like, where does my stuff come from? What am I using? Why are we doing this? And
Yeah.
so yeah. So David's definitely there in those ways. And especially now that Manresa is closed, like is more involved, like with, as we talk about the future and what we're trying to accomplish, we are hoping to kind of like pull him into some of the savory menu stuff as we go into the summer. So
Oh, that's cool.
this summer we want to expand our hours of operation for some of our cafes and kind of, and maybe this will mean that we will ultimately expand our hours permanently, but we thought it would be a fun way in the summer to just stay open a little later and to have a couple additional kind of like happy hour snacks. And so like working with David on taking some of the things we already are making, like, utilizing our bread or making, a country pate, like, but with David. So I'm excited about that because, again, strategically and from an operations standpoint, like how I approach this and where the focus and like I can see the narrow lane now of what we need to do or how to thread the needle, whereas like 5 years ago would have been like, okay, like how would we incorporate David? And I can go to David now and be like, hey, I really want us to work on a menu item together. Like, it needs to be this to some degree, and then we can create within the bounds that I know we can be successful in.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is
That's cool.
a great feeling, because
Yeah.
otherwise you can have all the great ideas in the world and you can't make them happen,
Yeah. Speaking of
So
ingredients, I'm curious if you have thought about, or even maybe even seen, like started to see the impact of this cocoa crisis that's happening?
We haven't, just because that's like one of the areas, like for us, everything has fluctuated in pricing over the last over the last couple of years. But as a bakery, like, we're not a chocolate company. And so we use chocolate. We use Valrhona chocolate more or less exclusively right now, but we don't,
The cocoa
like,
powder's the
that's
best.
not a huge portion of our food cost, comparatively
Yeah,
speaking.
yeah.
Like the butter
It's crazy. I don't
pricing.
know if you've heard
Yeah.
how I mean, like 70% of the production comes from the
No,
west
I
coast of
know.
Africa, and
No, I
like this
know.
El Nino has just like
Yeah.
wiped out.
Exactly. So in this one area, we're relatively lucky, just because it's just not something that is a giant portion of our company, and I
Yeah,
don't see it becoming a giant portion anytime soon. Like, we've done a little bit of chocolate work. Again, that's where, like, it's in an interesting, like, learning process of being a business owner and being like, I have all the ideas in the world, but, like, what do our customers actually want from us? Like, you can't people don't want everything from one place. They just don't, and so
yeah, yeah,
it's both. That's good, but it's also sometimes it's a little sad, but mostly it's good because at least it gives you some limits.
yeah. You
So
gotta have some focus. Okay,
yeah.
Ursula on our team.
Okay.
Ursula's like, shout out to Ursula. She's awesome baker, among other things. She asked me to ask you if there is another bread program, whether in the States or abroad, that you really admire right now.
Oh yeah. There's so many. Again, I mean, yes, there are. I I'm trying to, like, think of which ones to enumerate.
Well, let's just assume that you're gonna forget to call out some that you love,
Yeah,
and
for
this
sure.
is not
That's
like the
absolutely
one
well.
and only,
So
so that we don't alienate
when I think
anybody.
about baker, okay, so I'm gonna go two totally different directions. Portos in LA, I'm
Oh yeah, also
amazed
great
by.
food, by the way.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. We went, and we were lucky enough that a friend of a friend knew a lot of the chefs who work there. And so we were able to go see, like, their actual production facility, and then we went to one of their cafes. It was incredible. It was like, as the pastry cook who was working with for me at the time, who came with me on the tour, said, I wouldn't necessarily want to be working at a Porto's level, because it quite literally is, like, some of it is fully mechanized, but it was um they've just done such an incredible job scaling and maintaining quality and maintaining their price point. And they do everything from scratch. And everything is extremely affordable. And so it's their own little it's better than Panera, obviously, but like, it's so complex. And so, me as an operator and a
Yeah.
baker, I was just, like, so amazed by it. It was incredible.
Okay,
So
so
there's
that's the
that
scale
version.
side, and
That's
then
the
the
scale
other.
size. And then on the opposite of that would be, like, there's a bakery called Elmore Mountain Bread. And so our mill is a New American stone mill. And the maker of that mill is a guy named Andrew. And then he and his wife have this bakery. So he's, like, made hundreds of mills, and they're all over the country. And I think even some of them abroad now. But they also have a beautiful wood-fired bakery in Vermont. And it's like, so it's like the opposite end. It's like, if I
We're
could,
in Vermont.
well, I think it's in Elmore. I think it's
I'll
a
Google
small
it.
little town, but I could be wrong. Let's see. Elmore Mountain Bread. It is in no, it's in Wolcott,
Oh yeah.
Vermont.
Okay. Cool.
So, and so it's a wood-fired or tiny, tiny bakery. I think about my future, and um if I would open more bakery. Like, obviously, I'm going to continue the growth of this company, like, or however is appropriate. In different opportunities present themselves at different times, and you weigh them, and there's like short-term goals and there's long-term goals, and then you kind of see which, what I always hope is, I try to make decisions and think through things that, like, these short-term goals are going to be the same short-term goals, whether we hit the long-term goal or not, we're still going to be moving in the right direction, right? So we're not suddenly like, hey, we should start developing, I don't know, a line of chocolates. Like that's not where we're going to work, right? What we're going to work on is how can we keep making our product fresher and fresher? How can we be baking in the stores with the current stores we have? Because if we open future stores, I want us to bake in the store. Like all my stores right now, there's food prepared there, but we bake everything overnight in our bigger productions facility. But if we open stores farther away from this facility, like, and obviously the romance and the joy of having something warm from the oven is the dream, right? But we couldn't grow this business in this area and try to have with and from day one having 5 separate bakeries. No, couldn't have afforded it, couldn't have any of those things. And so, but then the opposite end of that is like the dream of like a wood-fired bakery. Like, so like the opposite of this, basically, like a very small wood-fired bakery, you mill your own flour. Maybe you even mix everything by hand. I don't know. There's a bakery in like outside of Quebec where it's a small bakery, but he makes everything by hand in like the wooden trough. So, I mean, there's so many great bread programs. And that's how I look at things. Like, how can we take inspiration from other people? Like, I'm not going to suddenly pivot the company, but how can I, what is it that I'm attracted to or drawn to in these other people's businesses, right? So, and then see if there's
I mean,
something
by the way,
relevant.
you were in New York. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of good bakeries. I mean, there's like Grand Daisy, Pain
Yeah.
d'Avignon, Bienqui,
Yeah.
Sullivan,
Bianchi. Yeah.
Amy's.
Yeah.
I feel
There's
like
so
they
many good
each
bakeries.
had their own, like the semolina raisin from Amy's is
Mm-hmm.
awesome, and then like the
Mm-hmm.
the baguette from Bienqui was like. Did you have a favorite when you were in New York?
She Wolf is really good.
Oh yeah, that was good
I
too.
liked She
Yeah,
Wolf a
that's a good one.
lot. That was kind of, I feel like that was like more my go-to because I
They had
liked
a
their
really good baguette
style
too.
of bread too. And they kind of like started a little bit like I started, like they were making bread for the restaurant group and then like that became
Hmm.
its own business. So I really liked their stuff a lot. I feel like, and I love Bianqui. But I think that probably at the time, like She Wolf was probably my
Yeah.
favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you kind of answered a question I was going to ask you that I ask often, especially to entrepreneurs, but we'll see if it's the same, which is if you have if you had unlimited resources and time and capital,
Hmm.
um, what would it, what would you be doing today differently if there was unlimited amount of money and time and
Yeah.
resources to do exactly what you wanted?
Yeah. I mean, I would, it would be two things. It would be continuing to open more stores on the West Coast right now, but where we're baking in store. It's not a particularly like exciting answer, but it's true. Like, oh, I love being, we always called ourselves like a neighborhood bakery, like in the sense that we like have intentionally put our stores inside like little downtowns. Like the only store that we have that's not in a downtown neighborhood area is our Palo Alto store. And we just, because we preferred like the Town and Country Shopping Center almost has more of that feel than like downtown California Avenue, Palo Alto. So I'd like to continue to be part of like smaller communities like that if money wasn't and where we were actually baking on site, and then developing a frozen line of products because there are certain things that people, the joy of baking is such a wonderful joy. The experience of, like, I love baking. I love baking, and I still love baking. And that feeling of like pulling something out of the oven. Not everybody is going to be a great baker, right? So to be able to like share that feeling with people, like I came out with during COVID a line of like baking mixes that uses our fresh milled flour. And so we have like a chocolate chip cookie, and it's our chocolate chip cookie recipe. We have a brownie, and our chocolate chip cookie is made with 100% whole wheat. Our brownie recipe is made with rye flour, and then our waffle recipe, or it could be waffle or pancakes, is made with einkorn flour. And I made those because I loved baking with my parents when I was a kid. Like my mom and I would bake all sorts of different things, but sometimes as a little kid, we would bake like a Duncan Hines cake box or a box of brownies. And so it was like that feeling of sharing the joy of baking is something that I would really love to, with all of the money and resources in the world continue to figure out how to be a part of. And so making baking accessible and fun for people when they're not necessarily going to become, baking takes a lot of energy and effort. It's really messy. It takes certain equipment. It takes some quantity of strength. If you want to make croissants at home, like, you need to be able to lock in dough. Like, not everybody can do that. Like, so to be able to share what I think is really beautiful product, like, with more people, and not just on the store level, but at the home level, I think that would be what I'd love to be able to do. Yeah.
Sounds like a great business, by the way. I mean, no one's really disrupted Sara Lee,
No, they haven't. They haven't. No, but you're right. Right. Yeah. What can we disrupt, please?
That's all right. That's your next business. You got to do that, because I totally agree, by the way, that it would crush.
Yeah.
Especially if you can do it at scale.
Yeah.
And it works. It really is.
It does.
It really
And
is smart.
it's so fun. I mean, it's special too. It's confidence building. And I think that's maybe something, not to get like a little bit too soapboxy right now, but I never thought I'd be a baker, I thought I was a political science and international studies double major with a minor in creative writing, and I own a bakery. Like, I thought I would be a lawyer. I thought I don't know what I thought I was going to be, but definitely didn't think I was going to be a baker. I thought I'd be a writer, but I definitely didn't think baker ever, And now I own a, bakery. And so what I mean by this, or what I'm trying to get to, is like, for kids, right? Like, I'm in my late 30s, and we talk a lot as an owner. We talk a lot about our employees, right? We talk a lot about who's out there right now, what attitudes people have, what people are looking for. And I think a lot about like how lucky I feel that I was still kind of like from a generation where we kind of really were taught, if you work hard, you can do anything. I didn't live through a pandemic as a teenager, et cetera. And I feel like people who are in their, like, now just getting to their early 20s or even a little bit younger, there's like a lot of negativity and a lot of lack of optimism for the future. And I get it. But like,
are you seeing that when you say that? Is that anecdotally hearing from your team, from like younger people on your team?
I listen. Do you listen to Pivot, the podcast?
I don't. I do listen to my young children that are,
Yeah.
And I asked this sincerely because I'm like, wait a second.
Well,
like,
so
I wonder
Pivot
what's going to happen.
It's Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway, and Scott Galloway is in a marketing. He's a successful.
Oh yeah, no, Scott. Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, they're awesome. And we all, like, a group of us all, like, listened to it, like, religiously. And yesterday they had on a futurist. Okay, and so he was talking about, I'm not sure who the guy was, but he I guess he's put together a TV show that's coming out that's and he goes all over the world and talks to people about the future, basically. He studies the future. But he said, in the poorest countries with the lowest quality of life, when you poll people are more optimistic than, so like in Africa, in like very poor areas of Africa, extremely optimistic for the future. United States, extremely pessimistic for the future. And he said the difference is, do you think of future, is the word future a noun or a verb? Are you building a future? Or is the future just a thing, right? And so when you asked me if my staff feels that way or how they feel, we have team members who are building their future. They have come to this country for a better life. They have given up careers. They are nurses. They were doctors. They were electrical engineers. And now they work in a bakery, right? Because they left they left something that was whatever, unsafe, whatever it might be, to build something more for themselves. So I have those team members, and they have hope for the future. And then I have team members who are younger, who are not as optimistic, who are a little bit like entitled. We try not to hire, we try to but there is sort of this, hey, if you're not happy, you can change your situation. Like, that's how I feel. But I definitely see that that's not how everybody feels.
It's such a, I mean, we could talk about this for a very long time, but like, America is, there's no there's so much opportunity
I
here,
know.
and there's so
I know.
much that you can do. And to your point, yeah, I mean, I'm in
Well,
my
and I guess
40s, but we're a similar age of
yeah,
like,
exactly. And I think that
you
that's what I was trying to get to with the whole like, the reason I got off on this tangent was because of the idea of this, like these cake mixes. And what I was wanted to say was, how can you build confidence in kids? You know, you need to build confidence in kids, and not every kid is going to be a great mathematician. And not every kid is going to be, and that's okay, you know. So it's like having these experiences where kids can have wins that, or maybe they don't get wins in other ways, I think is, and like
yeah,
that's what I think baking can do for people is like, you're creative, you're working with your hands, you're trying something, the cost of failure is not very high. Like there's all of these positive things that you can learn from baking. Like try again. Oh, I don't know. I just think that there's a lot of power to baking, like for young people too, for anybody, you know.
yeah,
My
yeah.
dad
We're
bakes, and he's in his late 70s, and he loves to, and it's so cute because he's a really good baker, but you know, he'll really like worry about making a change, and then he'll be like, but then I just did it, you know. And it's like, that's great, because here was this man who's a history professor who sat at a desk all his life, like learning, you know, and he's out there playing, you know. It's great. So yeah, I think
yeah.
that there's a lot of great
That is,
stuff
I
that
mean,
can
that
come
is
from it.
one of those beautiful things that happened during the pandemic with this
It
baking
was
thing that just sort of like erupted. Um,
absolutely.
but it is true. You, especially with kids, and I think about this a lot now, especially with mine, is like you have to build confidence without entitlement, which is a difficult thing to
Absolutely.
do. To say, hey, like we want to make sure we're singing all the things that
Right.
go well, but remind you that like,
Yeah.
hey, not everything will go well, and that's
No,
okay.
no. And I
you know,
I struggled. My parents, we talked about, like, I was somebody who, like, you know, things came pretty easily to me in life. Like I was a smart kid. I was really good at school. I loved school. Like, so when I got to a place where it was like, when things were difficult, it took me, my mom was like, you know, we couldn't let you win the, you know, shoots and ladders when you were a kid, because you had to learn, like, and you did not do well when we actually we didn't let you win, you know. We beat you, you were a mess, you know, but we had to do that because that's what parenting was, because you had to learn not everything's going to go your way.
yeah.
And there's a difference, like you're saying, in confidence. Hey, I can try this. I might not be like, like the um that feeling of belief in yourself that doesn't have to do with success. It's not about success, right? It's about believing. There's a difference, right? Because if your success is, belief in self is only associated with success, then it can be taken away from you, right? Shit
100%.
happens.
Well, yeah, and I think it's how you define success, which is
Well, for
which is so
sure.
important, right? Is
For sure.
if the way you associate success is my business is going well, thus I'm successful.
Correct.
Like you're successful, Avery, because you love baking, and somehow you've got to be able to create a world where you get to
Exactly.
do that all the time,
Exactly.
and that's
Exactly.
the success. Even if you scaled, whether you scale up to 100 of these, or you
Right.
stay at 6, or you go
No,
down to 5,
and
like
it
you're
has
doing the
to,
thing that you love.
and it has to make you happy too. Like, if, you know, like that's part of like the being mature too, I think, and growing up, is like realizing like there's cost to everything, right? So having 100 of these might not be the worth the cost, but like, you know, what are you willing to like negotiate or not negotiate with, right? So, you know, like I think you have to be able to have your eyes wide open and really see the cost and the benefit of things, in business, right? I mean, and in being a creative entrepreneur, because just
Yeah,
because
yeah.
something's
Well, it's
possible
also a
doesn't mean you should
stage
do
of
it.
the business that you might be right for and might not be, right? You might
No.
get to
Oh, yeah,
25
for sure.
locations and decide, you know what, I'm not the CEO anymore. Somebody
Yeah,
else should be, and
yeah,
I'll be
yeah,
a creative
yeah.
director or something.
Yeah. No, I know.
Um,
Yeah. And then, like I said, we really are still quite a small management team. And that's something, you know, there are hard days where you like want to affect change, and it's hard and it's tough. And you have to kind of sometimes say, okay, like today was not a win. Let's start again tomorrow. You know, like sometimes you get like frustrated, or you get, you know, like learning what the reality, like having a great idea, and then we're learning what the reality of it's going to take to make that idea come to life, you know? And I definitely, my one of my biggest lessons, and I try to remind myself of this, is like I'm I used to be extremely unrealistic about how fast things could change or be done. Things that I thought should take a month really take 3 months, and things that I think were going to take 6 months take 18 months. There were things I thought we were going to do when we got to this facility that this facility would let us be able to do that we're just getting to. And it's like, but that's okay. We're getting there, you know, and we're doing it the right way. So patience, you really have to have the patience, because otherwise you're not really building the foundation. And then you find out that it's really just that one person who's doing things the way you need them done. And if they leave, you didn't actually build a system. You just had a good employee, you know? So,
yeah, 100%. Well, look, I'm so excited for what you're building.
Thank you.
Excited also to go visit soon.
Yeah,
I'm East
definitely.
Coast, but next time on the West Coast. Congratulations on everything,
you.
on the business and the growth and what you're doing. It's really amazing. I'm really grateful we got to have this conversation.
Me too. This was really lovely. Thanks so much. I really appreciated it.